Oh, I've got some cool music for that. Really.
Recording.
Good evening, everybody that's coming in. We're going to begin our presentation. I'm going to give it another minute to allow folks to fully get in. I would kindly ask that for those who are coming in, that you mute yourselves so that we don't get background noise. I'm getting some background noise now. I'm not sure if that's from our lecturer today or not, but I ask that that you mute your mics as you come in, and we'll be starting very soon, momentarily. Thank you.
How do I do that? Okay.
Well, I think we can start now. Good evening. My name is Terry Alfred, and I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor Commission. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome you to the second of our Commission's Black History Month lecture series. Tonight's theme is Turning Tables, Radio History. As an advocate of the community, the Heritage Corridor Commission endeavors to integrate the African American cultural significance and impact on the city of Buffalo's history through public engagement, community education that invigorates, inspires, and enlivens cultural appreciation, preservation, and community development. The commission serves as the connector of the past, present, and the future for historic neighborhoods within the corridor. Tonight's lecture fully exemplifies the finest elements of our mission and vision. Established in 1961, Wufo is the only African-American owned radio station in Western New York. In 2013, Wufo was purchased by Ms. Sheila L. Brown of Vision Multimedia Group and True Bethel Community Development Corporation, making it Western New York's first Black female-owned station. And may I dare say too, you have very few women-owned stations in the entire country, let alone African-American-owned stations that are owned by women. Sheila is a well-respected icon in the community. Sheila is a well-respected icon in the community, where she opened and started a non-for-profit Black Radio History Collective, the first of its kind in the entire country. Envisioned by Sheila in 2014 and established in 2018, the collective is the first of its kind in the country dedicated to the stories of community and the sounds of rhythm and blues, soul, gospel music, that all emerged as a connection to the Black community during the 50s, 60s, and the 70s. The mix of community voices that hosted the talk shows and the melodies of soothing music were a vital part of the Black experience in America. Last year, Wufo Radio was selected as the anchor tenant for 509 Michigan Street, which is very exciting news for us that's within the corridor. This site presently is a city-owned site in the heart of our corridor that is soon slated for redevelopment. The project will redevelop the century-old present structure that has about 1,500 square footage. It has seen numerous modifications over the years. An addition south of the building will be constructed, a sister structure, replicating the historic streetscape of this heritage block. Recreation of the storefronts will be based on photographic and other historic documentation that fits the feel and the environment of the entire corridor in terms of what we're trying to achieve in this corridor as a historic landmark or historic destination. Our lecturer tonight, I'd like to introduce him to you now. Lee Pettigrew has been in the radio and broadcasting field for over 40 years and has worked for 93.7 WBLK, 1120 Total Gospel, and was one of the first hosts to host international, namely in Canada, in the 1970s. Lee began at Wufo 1080 AM in the summer of 1999 as a part-time on-air announcer. In 2001, Lee moved to the Morning Drive, the AM show. Later, he was promoted to director in 2004. Lee was a part of the transition Wufo for Wufo's big move from one location to his present Broadway location. 4 years later, he's helped the Wufo radio station switch from AM to FM. Currently, Lee is the assistant program director, assisting with the production of the DD in the Morning show. So it's my honor to introduce to you as our lecturer, Lee Pettigrew, who will take you the rest of the way in sharing the history of radio, especially urban radio in our Black community, and the exciting things that are continuing to happen in Wufo. And before I turn it over, I do also want to acknowledge the owner, the present owner of Wufo Radio, Miss Sheila Brown, who's in transit right now, but we always want to give her a shout out. So thank you for participating, Sheila. Lee, take it away.
Thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay? Hello?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Mr. Alfred. It was a great introduction. And just a couple of things to fill. I began my career at what you now call Joy in 1974 here in the city of Buffalo. And I want to spend a couple of seconds talking about how radio became basically the plan for entertainment in America today. It began over 85 to 100 years ago. Guillermo Marconi on Christmas Eve was trying to get his kids to sing a Christmas carol so that he could get the signal wirelessly to another destination. It took a while. The kids hated Dad, but it happened. And what they call wireless was born. By 1929, during the era of the Great Depression, radio was growing. It had gone through the First World War without too much change. By the end of the Second World War, radio in the United States was a full-blown entertainment phenomenon. And what I mean by that is you could catch anything on the radio, including talk, entire orchestras, entire productions, and entire programs that were drama. And some of them were very, very popular and lasted until they were transferred to television. And some of those plots and ideas were transferred to Hollywood. And from there, we know we went on into the different genres of music and the changes. And in speaking of changes, there was a cultural change going on in America in terms of the kind of music that we listen to. At that time, urban music, Black music, was called race music. A lot of people did frown on it, wouldn't play it, but there were an awful lot of people who took that chance because they knew one thing, which we also know today. The biggest fans of music are kids. Teenagers were crazy about something that Alan Freed called rock and roll, but they also liked the Black music. And that went on for a while. So you get to 1948, and the reason I'm mentioning 1948 is that's when the FCC allocated 1080. There was no WFO at that time. Two guys from Johns Hopkins, you can get this in Wikipedia, two guys from Johns Hopkins bought the position on the dial, set up the radio station, and they called it WINE. That did not work out well. You cannot market a radio station on something that just came out of Prohibition. They changed the call letters to WXRA. there were several changes in ownership. And then there was a gentleman by the name of George Hound Dog Lorenz. And Mr. Lorenz was a very creative, very aggressive programmer and radio announcer who wanted to play what he wanted to play. And at one time, he actually tried to buy the radio station. He was outbid by a McClendon group. Again, the price of this radio station, not in today's dollars, but in those dollars, was about $250,000. They buy it. McClendon owned it for a while. And then a Mr. Larkin came in, and Mr. Larkin was a bit different because he owned several radio stations. He owned WILD in Boston. He owned WAMO AM and a jazz station in Pittsburgh. And he decided to pick up the 1080 signal, and he wanted to call the 1080 signal W Joe in Buffalo. The FCC said no. As a matter of fact, I don't think any radio station has ever had someone's name attached to their call letters. So he went for WUFO. The rumors about it being associated with space travel, which was becoming popular at the time, are just that, rumors. Unidentified flying objects, no, it didn't work. WFO's 1080 signal, the 1080 signal started in Kenmore. They moved to Amherst and eventually moved to 89 LaSalle Avenue. Now, when Mr. Larkin bought it, it had a Black format. It catered to the Black community, and people really enjoyed the programming. He owned it for a while, but as far as dynamics is concerned, and it was then purchased by Sheridan Broadcasting. The reason I said that, because between Dynamic and Sheridan, there is an incredible history of people, an incredible history of passion. Let me give you a quick example. Jimmy Lyons, who you may have heard of, Jimmy Lunsford, who you may have heard of, Eddie O.J., Al Brisbane, Guy Cameron, Hank Cameron, all worked there. And these gentlemen, with the exception of one, actually never left Buffalo. Eddie O.J. became the mentor, manager. He was the name, the brand for one of the most popular male vocal groups in American R&B history, the O.J.'s. And he eventually moved to Phoenix, Arizona. But the community got popular music, they got community news, and they got something that I think is very interesting, and I'll explain it to you later why it is. They have it had a faith-based format. There was religious-based programming going on. And all of this happened in the course of maybe 10 or 15 years. By the 60s, things were changing. They were no longer called race records. It's Black radio. It's a Black format. And during that time, these gentlemen were in a position to take advantage of the position that Buffalo was in. You got to remember, Buffalo at one time was the place to come through, the place to be. They interviewed people like Dick Gregory, Joe Louis, Muhammad Ali, you name it, they came to Buffalo. They talked with them. And there were some young men working in this area at the time who went on to change the face of radio in America. And they are just three of the at least 30 or 40 people. I have a list of them, and I couldn't do that in half an hour, who actually are innovators in the business, who changed things in the business. One of them was Frankie Crocker. He was the first to leave, and I've got to add that Frankie Crocker was hired by a man named Jerry Bolden, who understood what he heard in Buffalo was radically different. So he brought Frankie to New York. And you got to remember, Frankie has said publicly, I never wanted to be just a disc jockey. I wanted to be in the movies. I wanted to be on TV. He did both. And he actually changed the way we view Black radio in a lot of different ways. And I'll mention that as I go on. And then there was a young man out of Alabama whose name was Jerry Bledsoe. And Jerry had one of the richest baritone voices that has been heard on the air in quite a while. He went to New York, but from a different standpoint. They all went to WWRL Super 16, but they all came from Buffalo. Now, the interesting thing about this is a lot of people that I've talked to told me, well, those guys were brilliant. They just opened the mic and talked. No, they all wrote down what they were going to say. And what is important about that to remember, there's a young man who's in high school, and he was in high school. My sister told me he was a junior, and she was a freshman. Gary Bird, who was nervous, he got hired in New York, went to New York, and he became the third member of what I call the trio that changed New York radio forever, because New York had never heard that before. The talk, the rhyme, the rhythm, the way they handled the music and their voices was very, very different. But in the meantime, something else was happening at WFO. All of them went on to be national artists, national stars. Gary performing with Stevie Wonder, a song that is still being played, and also being the person, by the way, who wrote the very first hip hop spoken word record commercially in the United States, long before Sugar Hill. It's called Every Brother Ain't a Brother. When you talk about talent, you also have to look at Wufo's talent that had commitment. They had a lot of commitment. They loved what they did. They did it eagerly. And the broadcasting climate in Buffalo is extremely competitive today. It was very competitive back then. And it's that kind of climate that brought that kind of talent to WUFO. WUFO continued to be an innovator. There's a gentleman who's still alive, fortunately, who started Gospel at Sunrise, who went on to be an executive at one of the largest gospel labels in the United States, Verity Records. His name is Jeff Grant. He's retired. He's a photographer. There was Thelka McCall, and I want to stop for a second because it seems almost like destiny with Sheila owning the station and founding Visions. Thelka was one of the first women in the United States in history to actually have her own show. Now, she didn't play all the jive that everybody else played. She was more oriented toward gospel, but she got her own show. And there were women who came after her. Dr. Darcel Holloway, who became the first jock, but Thelka was the first woman on the air. And it's the kind of thing, that commitment kept going. These people sometimes work double shifts, I found out. And there was a generation behind them as well. And they started very, very young. I said Gary started at 16. A young man by the name of Don Allen Jr. was 14 or 15 when he started working at WUFO. And he went on to work at 6 of the 10 largest cities in America in his career. He ended up in North Carolina. His father, of course, was into a more religious brand of radio, but Don Allen Jr. was well known and is still well known. And I might mention, if you go anywhere among veterans in Black radio who have been around for longer than 20 years, when you say WUFO, they know where it is and they know what you're talking about. That's the kind of reputation, that kind of talent came out of and took to America. In the 60s and 70s, there were some turbulent times again, and I'm going to show you in a way why Black radio became so powerful. Because during the riots, there were some artists who would go to the radio station and ask for people to calm down. James Brown was one of them. He went to New York, he went to Boston, he went to Connecticut. But what happened was advertisers began to see that it did have an effect, that it did calm down some cities. So they realized, it wasn't an overnight thing, they realized that these people were reaching customers. So we began to get more revenue. The other thing about WFO being community oriented, at a time when Buffalo's Black community had a great business atmosphere, William Street, Broadway, Jefferson Avenue, Fillmore, you had a very close-knit situation with business people who understood the value of radio and the value of a personality pushing their product. So all of this is occurring. And then after the 60s and the early 70s, the individuals who were in New York City began to be recognized. That's why WFO's name began to rise. I might add that, and I'm going back, George Hound Dog Lorenz did try to buy WFO. The McClendon group beat him out. He went on to found WBLK, still stayed with the Black format, but he went toward blues. WUFO has such a dual role in the community. The community believes that, and I'm gonna say this the way, that's our radio station. And they look for certain things from the radio station. They look for a great presentation. And I'm not dogging the young people on the radio today, but you better speak the King's English to work at WUFO, and you better speak it well. They look for people who have personality, because to work behind the kind of individuals that I've just told you about. You don't just go on and do anything. You have to be good enough to get that audience to stay with you. Competition began to grow. Race music was no longer called race music. It was Black music. There were some situations in the United States where advertisers, and now I'm talking about New York City, that said, we will not advertise, we call the non-urban initiative, we will not advertise with Black-owned radio stations. Specifically, Cadillac dealers in New York City, which I find hard. Under the auspices of the owners of WBLS at the time and Frankie Crocker, he decided not to use the word Black anymore. He decided to say, well, it's going to be urban. And that's what it's been for almost the last 50 years. It's been urban. The ability of jockeys to play whatever they wanted began to change. Program directors began to orient content towards specific targets, but Black radio, particularly WFO, still became a station that took on something brand new that no one had ever heard. And that tradition still is with us. We still play music that no one has ever heard. On the faith-based situation, as I said before, you cannot reach the Black community in America really as a radio outlet without some level, it could be gospel hip hop, but some level of faith-based attitudes there, because that's part of our culture. Sheridan Broadcasting bought the radio station, and at the time I was there, they owned a gospel network. They owned WATV, WILD, WAMO, AM, and FM. They owned one other outlet that I don't recall, and things were going along, I thought, very, very well. And then Sheridan began to divest itself of its properties. We were at a point where I knew who Mrs. Sheila Brown was, but our general manager was the late Carol Salter. And the station wasn't really getting what it should in terms of having a full-time religious format. And I'll get into that, and I definitely promise to get into that in a podcast and explain to you why. When Carol saw that Sheila had this kind of talent, this kind of background, and she had the ability to go out and get those sales, she asked for Sheila to be the general manager. There were also some personal situations that Carol had to deal with that made her do that. And of course, Sheridan went along with the idea. Things went along well for a while, and then we heard that Sheridan was going to sell the radio station. Now, I want to stop, because any business you run, anytime, what you experience in their product is only 10% of it. That's how the money is made, but behind the scenes is where the work is done. And there are a lot of costs, and specifically with broadcasting, there are a lot of licenses, there are a lot of hurdles to get over. Buying a radio station is quite a challenge, especially in the 20th and 21st century, because you have to understand broadcasting changed to the point where consolidation and syndication eliminated that immense pool of talent, which I know is still there. And you have a few people working to do what Wufo has done all the time, reach the community on a one-to-one level and get them to stay with you. Sheila decided many years ago that she was going to buy the radio station. We had heard this, but you know, I got to say this, and I don't know if she's listening or not. I'm not saying it because she is. If you don't want somebody to know something, tell Sheila. She was able to get the radio station moved because they were going to tear the building down for a new apartment complex. Moved, get a property on a site, and get a site that I now consider to be advantageous going toward the future, being in the Michigan Avenue Heritage Corridor. And at the same time, create something that I don't think Buffalo, and I know for a fact, having been to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., I don't think any radio station has. And that's a decor and a design and a brand, a physical brand that you won't find anyplace else. Now, I'll tell you now, if you haven't been to a radio station, when you walk in, you'll see office buildings, you'll see offices, You will see cubicles and microphones, and that's it. When you walk into WFO, it's a totally different thing. Getting to WFO as an AM FM, and let me stop, put a pin in it. AM FM is like listening to your favorite song and having somebody pull the plug on the radio. That's how it went off. She said, we want to be FM. And I looked, I said, okay, there are ways to do that. She went on, we became FM, and it was a bit of a shock for a lot of people. And it's still a shock, please. FM is the same you listen to anyplace else, but it's WFO signal. It's 24 hours a day. But in order to do all of that and be a woman and be young, now remember, this is 2021. That was 2013, actually 2012. That was 10 years ago. Getting the financing to do it, getting the staff to do it, being able to continue to the mission, reach the community, service the community, cover everything about the culture, and at the same time makes a profit. That's quite a task for one person, and then bringing on people and getting the talent to keep going. So I'm really in awe of what has occurred thus far. I can tell you without divulging too much that that's just the beginning, because with the internet, you can now hear us in Tokyo, Ireland, Germany, and Hawaii, if you so choose to. But we're also moving into podcasts. We're also trying to keep up with the technological advances that are going on. The programming that we carry still maintains that mission. We have the religious component. We have the component of the community that reaches you on your gut level. And it all started with Marconi, actually. But we also are now an urban AC radio station, which, and I heard this earlier this week in a meeting, you're not going to find us offering our audience something that is, I'm going to use the word gently, risque. We want to make it inclusive, not only for mom, dad, but grandma and baby boy. And therefore it is friendly, it's family friendly. Even some of the more radical programming that you may experience in certain spots. Just in certain spots, there are some people with some very outstanding opinions. And because I'm the engineer on a lot of those talk shows, I look at them and we have a disclaimer for that, but that is not overall the format of the radio station. It's an amazing journey, and we hope that all of you can be a part of it. Stay with us. We're just getting started. Congratulations on being one of the few women owners in radio. Women do not reach this level. They reach that level in television. There are a lot of executive vice presidents of programming, et cetera, in television who are making that kind of money, but not putting in that sweat equity in radio, which takes so much time. I want to invite you all to join me on the podcast because I really want to dig into Buffalo radio history. I want to dig into more of the personalities and the names that I did not mention. Keith Pollard, Byron Pitts, Carl Allen, whom a scholarship foundation is named after Lynn Hayes, Terry Davis. They're coming to my mind. I want to get into not only Helen Stone, what they were at the station, what they're doing now. A lot of those people are still with us and still very active in our industry. And they are having an impact no matter where they are because of what they got here in Buffalo. Danny Harris and Venus Ford, who are producers for Reach Media. It's amazing who came out of Buffalo, but more amazing, most of them, all of them came out of WUFO. Ron Atkins went on to become a national program director. It's coming back very slowly. But again, thank you. I do hope you continue to listen. We've got some big surprises in 2022 and beyond. And one of the last things I want to let you know is that the biggest change that you'll be able to see is we're moving again. We're moving into a brand new facility. It is going to encompass the theme of the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor and give WUFO a state-of-the-art physical presence in the broadcast community.
Well, thank you, Lee. That was very informative and a very good presentation. At this point, we'll entertain questions, and we're going to ask that you do it this way just to keep things orderly. If you can place your question in the chat box, if you have a question to Lee or an observation that you'd like to make to Lee and to the other participants on this Zoom, we ask that you just put it in the chat box. The chat box could be found if you put your cursor down to the bottom of the screen. You'll see this it's like a talking box that opens up. Just click on that, and you get to the right-hand side another window that will open up, and you can simply type in your question or your observation that you'd like to share. I do already have my own questions, and I've already received some questions from some of you. So, Lee, if you don't mind, I could start the questions right now. First of all, someone just popped one up. I think this is a good question. It's a simple question, but for those who don't know, where's the new facility going to be located that you just spoke about?
It's 509 Michigan Avenue, which is actually 20 yards from the current building.
So, actually, I can add on to that. If you know where the Michigan Street Baptist Church is, on Michigan,
right next door.
It's right next door to that, and then there'll be a sister structure, which doesn't exist presently. That'll be 507 Michigan as well, right near the corner of Michigan and Broadway.
Yes.
So the next question is: in your career, Lee, in radio as a DJ, could you talk about or share with the participants here those famous individuals that you may have met, that you may have interviewed as part of your shows in the past, that may have made the biggest impact on you, not just professionally, but personally?
I'm gonna be honest with you, and I thought about this before coming on this Zoom. The person who impressed me the most was Gregory Hines. I caught him on his last tour. He had been diagnosed with third stage prostate cancer. He never let on about it, and he was one of the nicest human beings I'd ever met in my life. Marvin Gaye walked in on me in my first year in radio, and I had kind of been told that he was coming, but I didn't believe it. And after I caught my breath, we had a conversation about why he wasn't going to go on stage that night. I think one of the most impressive opportunities I had that I'll never forget was talking with Hillary Clinton. When she and Bill were campaigning for Al Gore, they called one morning, and Bill was on business, but First Lady Clinton at the time was very congenial and sent a shout out to one of my kids. I never forgot that. But there are so many people that I've had the opportunity to meet: Earth, Wind, and Fire, James Brown, George Benson, whom I met before he became famous, Larry Graham, Kirk Franklin, John P. Key, Donnie McClurkin on several occasions, Shirley Murdoch. These are people who they're ordinary folk with extraordinary talent. And some of them are extraordinarily powerful people, not only one-on-one in person, but on stage. They have an anointing or a grace about them that they just carry with them. You can see if they weren't musicians, they'd be somebody else very well known. And quite a few athletes, but those I don't really recall as well.
Okay. Next question. What was the inspiration that led you into the radio business?
Actually, music has been a part of my life all my life since I was 3. My best friends in grammar school all became musicians, so the music part was natural. I was introduced to radio as a college student, and I was bitten by the bug. I enjoyed it. And as I said, I already had the music by the time I was 18. So that made me want to do this, as I called it at the time. And I began to try to figure out a way to come home and do it, because I came home in the summers and I would listen to the radio and I loved it. So that was the reason that I actually made an attempt to get into the industry. And I must say that I've got to offer this to people. If there are educators out there, if there are parents out there or grandparents, what you say to young people is very important. Because one of the things that I've thought about in the past few days that I was told as a communication student is a professor told me one day I was having a bad day. He said, "Don't worry, you were born for this." I believed him. I actually believed the man, and that sustained me in the tougher times.
Mhm. Great. What are the biggest changes technically, namely with equipment and things, that you feel were game changers that impacted radio or the radio industry?
The computer as a whole is one of the biggest changes that you could possibly even envision. No one ever thought about it. And the ability to communicate literally thousands of miles, like you still need a tower and a transmitter, but you can communicate all over the world almost instantaneously online. And there are some streaming opportunities that are available that are really don't have a delay on them. So that I think was one of the biggest things. And I recall for a person who has quote unquote seasoned as I am, I had to learn computers in order to keep working. I couldn't sit back and say, I don't want to do that. That's new technology. And I remember a gentleman I was working with who told me when CDs began to be played, he said, one day these machines are going to talk for you. And now they do.
Mhm. Great. So how does Wufo Radio find new music, especially if the goal is to find things no one else has heard before?
I'll say nowadays, people give them to us. We listen to them. There are companies that are out there looking for artists so that they can promote and present those artists. But on the average of 5,000 to 8,000 new artists are out there every month. So finding new music is not hard. Finding new music that could be a tool for you to keep an audience with you is a little bit more complicated. So a lot of times I get calls. Sometimes people mail me things, and some people just walk in. I've got a CD I'm still listening to from a guy who gave me the CD, a full CD that was produced in Los Angeles. And I'm still listening to that. He listened to it and gave me his suggestions, so I'm gonna give him my suggestions. But yeah, it's a pretty much informal procedure. You know, Terry, if you can sing, give me a CD, I'll listen to it.
You'll be waiting a long time for that CD.
Okay.
We have a couple just quick observations for you. Someone mentioned that Pettigrew, you rock. So that's a compliment. And then there's a kind of a question here. As a DJ, do you miss the radio station? So I don't know if they're meeting the old station back on LaSalle.
No. I've been to so many facilities and all different kinds of facilities. There is a feeling you get when you're working for what I call a great atmosphere. And, you know, that's with us. That's with me. It was even with me when I was, you know, helping to put together the first full-time gospel station. That passion is what keeps you there. That passion is the same thing as a performer experiences on stage when they get a round of applause. Those people are applauding you. They're listening to the station because you're playing their song, but they're listening to you. And that, as long as that's there, no, I don't miss the building at all.
Great. Here's another question. As a mentor to young people, have you ever talked or recommended to any young person who's looking to want to get into the radio industry? And if you have, what do you mostly say or recommend?
The number one thing I tell people is to learn as much as you can about the business and the company you want to work for. I tell people, don't get stuck in one kind of music. You have to be very broad, whether you have a background in music or not, to be successful. And I also particularly tell them now, because there's just a shortage of them. You need to consider broadcasting on air and engineering, broadcasting on air and learning sales, broadcasting on air and learning promotions. You know, it's a great advantage to have the talent to go on the air, no doubt. It's very exciting, but the people and the categories that I'm talking about outside of marketing on the web, folk are not going into engineering. These engineers are getting older and retiring. So it's gotten to the point where it's hard to find a software engineer who understands electricity. It's very difficult. And if you can get the experience and get under the mentorship of someone who knows that, you'll have a fantastically very lucrative career in engineering. So that's what I tell young people who say, well, I want to be a DJ. Nah, wait a minute. You don't want to be a DJ.
Great. Now, I think this has been mentioned before. We talked about Sheila Brown being one of a handful of African American and African American women at that owns a radio station. For the listening audience, could you maybe speak to the importance of that in terms of the industry and talk about how tough this business is in terms of owning your own radio station? Maybe most of the stations that we listen to on the radio are part of conglomerates, groups,
Right.
and things of that nature. So, could you maybe speak to that issue?
Yes, to be a standalone basically comes down to one thing. What corporations are able to do because of resources, you still have to do. Nobody gives you a break because you are not because you don't own 25 stations. You don't get that break. You have to be competitive against the big boys as well. And there are certain things that have to be done. Like any other business, you have overhead, you have sales costs, general administration. You have to get financing for your facility. When you first start, they used to tell us that you won't make a profit in 3 years. And the idea of paying people and being able to sustain the exorbitant electric bills that radio stations generate, and also the other cost of running a business, that's an amazing feat. And that's why there are not that many people that want to do it. Like I said a little bit earlier, there's a passion that's involved that keeps it going. In terms of being a female and a Black female and being in ownership, the broadcasting sector is no different than any other sector. There is this misconception that somehow being female is a second-class human being. And that extends to finance, that extends to legislation, that extends maybe even to the presentation of opportunities. And you have to overcome that. Those are the silent hurdles that you have to overcome. And after you've been in the business a while, you recognize them as they come and for what they are. You may have had experience in getting around them, getting over them. And at the same time, it's something you can't do alone. There have to be people who believe in you and believe in what you're doing in order for you to do that. Now, if you happen to be a billionaire already, it's possible. But to start as an ordinary individual and take on a business like this, that takes an extraordinary amount of work, a lot of elbow grease and perseverance.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have two more questions. You mentioned in your presentation, someone said about Mr. Larkin, and it was mentioned that Mr. Larkin owned WLIB or one of the radio stations locally. Just for clarity, is this the same Mr. Larkin of like the Larkin building that used to own the soap company in the city?
I'm not sure. I know that he owned a couple of radio stations in Florida, and it wasn't WLIB, it was WILD in Boston that he bought.
Thank you.
That I'm not really sure of. I run across him when I'm reading history a lot of times. He was a good businessman. Was he? And there's a difference on that level. I'm going to say again, passion. You can understand the money, but you don't understand the business. So the passion's not there.
Yes.
All you're doing is counting. And that's going to eventually, it's going to eventually slow you down. We're going to see some things happen in television very shortly. That's going to be a result of people who are just counting the money, not connecting to their audiences. I don't know if I answered that or not.
Got you. Thank you. And this is the last question. So regarding and related to the Black Radio History Collective, in your view, why is this important to our community, this collective?
For me, those artifacts that are in there bring back a lot of memories because I was around when a lot of them began. But I remember my daughter being 7, and I showed her 45 and she said, "What is that?" It's not just the artifact, it's the history behind the circumstances in which it was used. And that covers the history of what happened to our people in America. Because I've said before, I haven't said it this year yet, radio is a soundtrack for your life. And we're showing you the growth of a radio station from a radio club to what it is today over a period of about 50 years, which is remarkable because there are things you can touch. There are things that if you have the right person with you, there's an entire story behind this book, an entire story behind this kind of a microphone. This is the experience you get when you go to the African American Heritage Smithsonian in Washington, only it's much bigger and more extensive. And I think that for a radio station to do that, particularly WFO, that's a great step because we have such a rich history. And we were around at a time when music wasn't what it is, the business was not what it is, and the technology was not what it is. So we have a story to tell, and I think it's a story that people need to hear.
Thank you, Lee. Is there any last, final words you want to leave with the audience before we sign off?
Well, I want you to listen to power965radio.com. And I want you to know that we will continually be oriented toward servicing the community, not just entertaining them, but servicing the community with information that they need. And hopefully I'll get an opportunity to give you a tour of the Black History Collective soon. And thank you for having me.
Fantastic. I think we all be looking forward to that, especially as coming from you. And on behalf of the Heritage Corridor Commission, we'd like to thank you, Lee, not just for tonight and for your presentation, which I think was a very good presentation that you provided. Some things that for us to mull over, not just just hearing the history, but really listening to you in terms of what's important in this industry. That's going to always continue. And we thank you for your service for over 40 years on radio and servicing the community. That's a great accomplishment in itself. And speaking for Sheila, I'm sure she's happy to have you, not just part of her family with the Wufo family, but to allow her to share you with all of our families, every day that you're on the air and beyond. So we look forward to bigger and great things, with you and with Sheila and with the Wufo Radio family, especially with the Black Radio History Collective. I also like to thank all of you tonight for zooming in and staying on, to the presentation and to the questions themselves. I'm reminded to remind you by Audrey Clark, who's the commission's project manager, who's been flipping the slides and gathering the questions from you. That we have some upcoming lectures that you see here Tuesday, Next Tuesday, the 15th, we have representatives of the African American Veterans and Veterans Monument that's soon going to be dedicated in the summer, I believe. They'll be talking about veterans and segregation in the military and that history. So looking forward to that. On Tuesday, February the 22nd, docent Sharon Holly with the Nash House is going to be presenting on the ABCs of Buffalo Black history. And then finally on Wednesday, February the 23rd, the Untold Stories of the Underground Railroad in Buffalo will be facilitated by Lily Wiley Upshaw, who's the chair of the Buffalo Niagara Freedom Stations Coalition that manages the church presently now and is seeing significant renovation. I would also remind you, the slide's not on here, but this coming Thursday, we'll be sharing our year-long strategic action plan and economic development strategy that we've been working on the past 12 months now. So we're excited to present that formally to the community. So you can see, you can really see the roadmap that we'll be using in transforming the corridor into a more brighter and interesting destination that complements our 4 cultural anchors. Excuse me. And finally, we do have upcoming tours that you can see here. They're both virtual tours, mostly, on Friday, February the 25th, Saturday, February the 26th, and Saturday, February 26th, with our friends in Niagara Falls. So this month is chock full of information and opportunities to participate, to learn about our history, to include your family, and especially your children, young people, to learn more about their histories as well as it relates to Buffalo and the Buffalo Niagara region. So in closing, again, I thank you all for participating with us tonight, and hopefully we'll see you Thursday and in the upcoming weeks to come. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lee. Have a good night.